Thank you for coming again. For the second lecture in the series, War in Babylon, by our guest professors, Kamara Scott and Stafford Scott. The lecture series is hosted by the Center for Research Architecture, Susan and Christina and Ralia, by Forensic Architecture and by Goldsmiths, and I'm grateful for everybody that made it possible. We're really blessed and honored to have you here with us. I can see that some people here can see some new faces, so we'll introduce the lecture series very briefly, but again. But before that, I have to say how delighted and, though not surprised, by the overwhelming response. And I'm talking about the intensity of political intellectual thinking that has taken place at Goldsmiths since Kamara and Stafford joined us. The level of engagement of our students, of other students across Goldsmiths, the level of interest, but particularly the kind of solidarity that comes about when one engages in political intellectual work around contentious issues. And these are moments that kind of focus the mind, that allow us to understand in very concrete way the sort of historical, sometimes theoretical material that we are reading, because they're made concrete and they're made to matter. And that intensity of thought, the intensity of practice that we've experienced here since Kamara and Stafford began is an echo of the way that we were, the previous things we were doing together, and particularly the exhibition War in Babylon, the community struggle for truth and rights, which was more or less our starting point of thinking, working politically, aesthetically, intellectually together. This exhibition was a collaboration between Tottenham Right, between Stafford and Kamara, and Rihanna Jade Parker, who also curated this exhibition. And in particular, speaking about the way in which an incident and the political action around it intensify thought and practice, we need to go back to the fact and acknowledge the fact that Kamara, Stafford, Forensic Architecture, and the Center at Goldsmiths actually met around a police killing, a police murder, the police murder of Mark Duggan on August 4th, 2011. A police murder that has still not fully been acknowledged. There's no accountability, no full accountability for that. And that fact means that it keeps on steering action. So that moment, those 2 seconds in the afternoon of August 4th, and the fact that that issue has not been fully resolved, despite our clearly showing that Mark Duggan was shot unarmed, that the police was lying, that the IOPC manipulated the evidence after that. There is no systematic acknowledgement. And that goes precisely to the heart of what this lecture series and your professorships are about. And that is how a particular moment, a particular instance that is measured sometimes in milliseconds can generate political effect that are much beyond it, could resonate well beyond the incident. And if the pain resonates across the generation, the unacknowledged pain, the system haven't come to term with and close that matter, also activism and political work on it still is kind of organized around that vortex of the incident. And I think that something that we have learned during the work with Tottenham Rights, with Kamara and Stafford, and more so during the series of workshops and tutorials and projects that you've done with the students at the center, is that when you are dealing with incidents, particularly with those unresolved moments in history, two things need to happen. Those incidents need to be reconstructed, and they also need to be interpreted. And reconstruction, for anyone that knows the work of FA, is often simply the plotting of a kind of a history, a molecular history of an instant, a relation between perpetrators, weapons, trajectories, victims, and space. The duration of an incident is measured in milliseconds. The mode of analysis for us is spatial reconstruction, in which videos and testimonies are brought together into conversation. And that means that every instant, a history of an instant, or a history of an incident, is always the history of a coincident, right? Of things that happen at the same time. It is a simultaneity of perspective and relations that come to bear and intensify that moment of rupture. And interpretation is also the long-term political work that needs to be done and has been done in the exhibition War in Babylon in relation with you. It is moving out of the incident and weaving the evidentiary thread across a huge epistemic, historical, political space, connecting the incident to threads of different elements, to state institution, rules, commands, procedures, calculations, and tactic that are much bigger than the incident itself. So that act of navigation around that moment of intensity, this reconstruction and interpretation that need to happen, is, I think, what we are doing together in the center with you. Just a brief reminder of who the speakers are, for those that are here that haven't been to the previous lecture. Kamara is a creative producer and journalist who studied politics at Brighton and worked with The Guardian and the Monitoring Group. Together with Rihanna, she was the creative force behind the curation of War in Babylon, which was described as a once-in-a-generation show and the best exhibition in 2021 anywhere in the world. A lifelong activist and community leader, Stafford has been at the forefront of the fight for black British rights since the 1980s. In 1985, he first rose to prominence as the co-founder of the Broadwater Farm defense campaign, which later evolved into Tottenham Rights, where both Kamara and Stafford are now active. In Tottenham Right, they've led countless initiatives to support the victims of police violence in North London and beyond. I just also want to mention that as part of this professorship, they were working together with the Center for Research Architecture on the days and years leading up to the night of the 18th of January 1981. The project is called Burning an Illusion and set out to investigate the police investigation of the New Cross fire, very near from here. An investigation that was done with Kamara and Stafford, and it already resonated with support groups and victim families. Today, the lecture will continue the previous one. So the previous one dealt or charted the institutionalization of racism within British society, the importation of colonial-style policing, which worked to underprotect and over-police black communities. And today, Stafford and Kamara turn their attention to the designation of suspect communities, all the way from the SAS laws to the modern day manifestation in a Met Police gang matrix. Am I right? Is that the lecture today? Or so yeah, kind of a prelude to the big data violence produced through data that I think is something that we just see the beginning of. So with that, without further ado, there was a lot of ado, but without further, please, Stafford. Thank you.
1, 2, 1, 2. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Wow. How do I follow that? I was sitting there listening to that opening, and I'm not even sure how I can follow that, to be quite honest. Thank you for that, Prof. You have helped me to understand better what I really should be doing in this space and in this place. And I hope to meet expectations. We hope to meet expectations. It's I always have to say it's something special for me to be standing in the Stuart Hall building doing a lecture. The truth is, I didn't survive and make it out of secondary school. I didn't get to sixth form. So to be here in front of you all really is something special from my perspective. I hope I can make it relatively interesting and worthy of your time this evening. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming out and for being here. I'm not going to be able to talk about state violence and big data all the way to the matrix in this lecture today. Today we're going to talk about, well, the title is about suspect communities. And I'm going to talk about one of the original communities that was targeted as such, and who was labelled as such, and what that labelling actually meant to us. For those of you who didn't get to the exhibition at the ICA, it was a landmark exhibition because it was an opportunity for us. And it really was because I really got to start by saying thanks to the professor, to Forensic Architecture, and to CRA for giving us this opportunity. It's our engagement with them that started when they made the Mark Duggan model. Have you all seen the FA Mark Duggan model? Yeah? If you haven't, then you should have. Please make sure that you do. When they created this model, and it became, and it is a tool for us in our community, for us to be able to share with others and show others what happens when we have the resources, the capabilities, and the partners with the skills to be able to tell our story, when we're able to investigate and show what happened from our perspective. I use that model in other environments when people ask me what they need to do to create change. You know, oh, we know we need to change, but we really don't know how to do it. I show them the Mark Duggan forensic architecture model, and I tell them if you really want to make change, you have to be forensic in your intention, forensic in your ambition. You have to really believe in what you're doing, and you have to put in the kind of resources and time that will make your effort worthwhile. So I'm really pleased to be here, honoured, and really just saying that we're here because of the allyship and support that's being shown to us by Forensic Architecture and the Centre for Research and Architecture. Although obviously we believe that we bring not just an authentic voice, but we bring a voice that tells a narrative that about our stories, about our communities' collective histories that many people haven't known. I think what we did in the exhibition space was we were given for the first time a real opportunity to join all the dots together. And when we did that in that space and on that scale, it really had some impact. And it's led us to be here today. So I want to thank my partners for enabling that to happen. So now we're going to talk about, now I'm going to talk about what I'm here to talk about, and that is the war in Babylon, and one of the front lines in that war. I'm going to take us back to a time, I don't know, some of you probably weren't even born, but take us back to a time when, in some sense, they're not that much different from today. Bleak and dismal in terms of the black community's ability to access and benefit from public services. Really high levels of unemployment and really high levels of exclusion from schools. It's happening nowadays. Back in those days, we could put a number to it. But nowadays we can't, because kids are being excluded from academies and they're a law unto themselves, so we don't know the real numbers, but crazy numbers that are impacting on our community, impacting on our young people, and impacting on their behaviours. As the life that many of us grew up in England in the 1970s. I weave my own story through telling the story of my community. I was born in 1960. This estate, the Broadwater Farm estate in Tottenham, was built in the late 70s. You know, when they was building this estate, as it was actually being built, we used to go over there on the way home from school, used to go to William Forster School, and on the way home we would go through. It was an area, you know, kids, a bit of an adventure, and we would go there, and the caretaker would chase us. He would chase us with his dog, chase us off of this space. So we knew even before it was built that this space wasn't for us. The caretaker's name was Ross. We became great friends in the years that I'm going to talk about, but it's the way that this unbuilt space was already marked for some other groups within our community. And it was considered to be, when it was being built, it was considered to be some kind of modern utopia. It was this really modern, fanciful, this is the 70s, you know, when, wow, I mean, we're in a place where we talk about the Centre for Research Architecture, where no architects, look, what architect could be proud of building spaces like this? But in the 70s, somehow they was able to sell it to the local authority that this was the kind of modern place that working class families, but not lower working class families, the upper echelons of that working class group, this is where they were going to want to live. This is a depiction of the block that became our home block, and this is the mezzanine floor that was supposed to have all these shops that was supposed to cater for the needs of the people on this estate. The estate was actually built, they excavated an old river to build this estate, the Moselle. So it was built almost in a bowl, and because of that, they put it on stilts. To raise everything up to one level, they put it on stilts, and it meant that there were underground car parks. And this is, again, the 70s. Their technology wasn't that great. The lighting, illumination of the space wasn't that great. They created these estates with massive walkways. This building over here that you can see over here, that's, let me do this properly. This building that you can see here, oops, that's where the heating is coming from. That's where the generators are. It's a monstrosity of a building, but it gave the best heat anywhere in Haringey. One of the great bonuses of the Broadwater Farm estate was it was always boiling hot. But it's, you know, it's a concrete monstrosity. When we were on the estate, we called it the concrete jungle, and that's really what it was. One mass of concrete, a lot of prefab buildings that was brought over there and built on site, put together on site. I think it was about 1,100 dwellings. Very few of them were one bedroom, so they were actually created for families. And when they did move families in initially, there were hardly any black folk. It was the white families that they considered to be slightly better off than the rest. And it was about this creating this utopia. The chair of the housing committee that designed or agreed the design and such thought that he should be given awards for it. You know, this estate, every block on this estate is named after a battlefield. Right? They call it a modern day utopia, but every block is named after British, where British bombers are based. From Stapleford, Rochford, they're all linked to the army, and they're all linked to air bases. So it was already built as if it was a place that was built to remember or to host or to be a ground, a battleground for people. Initially, the families that lived there complained that there was rat infestation, cockroach infestation. This is because it was built over the Moselle. They complained that they were isolated and there was very few facilities for them to use over there. There was just a normal social club, which was a bar and a hangout for NF thugs eventually, and very few shops. And there was no buses. To go to a bus, to get to the bus stop, people had to walk at least half a mile. They didn't like living there, and very soon the families there started to decant. Unfortunately, not all the families who were on the estate at the time had the wherewithal to be able to do what they needed to move off the estate. And mainly the elderly people, the elderly that were on the estate ended up being trapped there. And those who came there weren't so elderly ended up also being trapped on the estate. And the council then found the estate really difficult to let. Not only that, the estate now was starting to get a reputation for criminality. And the reason why was because of the design of the estate. The design of this estate, as you can see here, I'm trying to get the proper point now. As you can see here, some of the blocks, they were really long, narrow blocks with 30 homes on one side and almost 30 homes on the other side. I mean, these are all these prefab buildings that they've brought here. And people found out, criminals found out, first of all, that the architecture, the underground walkway, the underground car parks that were badly lit, the walkways where you could walk around this estate with literally, without coming down to ground level if you knew it, these badly lit corridors, and this is after we got them to improve the lighting, the badly lit corridors. This wasn't a utopian design, this was a design for the criminals. And once the criminals understood that, they came there in their droves. You could break into flat number 1, and from flat number 1 go through a fire exit into flat number 2 or 3, whatever the number was. And you can go from there into the next flat, and from there into the next flat, and from there into the next flat. So people soon found out, and they started to say that they had the key to Broadwater Farm. And the key was you broke into the low rise. You could get 10 flats for the price of 1. And unsurprisingly, Broadwater Farm, it became well, not a haven for criminals, but it became a place where crime went through the roof, literally went through the roof. It had the highest crime rate. It soon developed the highest crime rate in the borough. So it was run down. It was rat infested at times, few resources, high crime, and at the same time, this is the early 80s. The Windrush generation, the children of the Windrush generation, they were now coming of an age where they wanted to be outside of their homes. Our parents our parents came to this country, and they came from islands where capital punishment was the norm. And in this country at the time, capital punishment was the norm. And some of our parents suffered from something called post-traumatic slave syndrome, which is where some of the things that they learned from their parents, who learned from their parents, who learned from their parents, who happened to be enslaved people, was pretty negative. And they used to brutalize some of us, not me personally, but some of us used to get brutalized in our homes by our parents, because that's what they were learned, and that's what they were taught you do to control people. They wanted to come out of their homes and maybe couldn't afford it because they were growing up in a time, as I said, when unemployment was through the roof. Many of them had been sent to SEN schools, or schools for educationally subnormal children, ESN schools as they were originally called, and they didn't go, they didn't attend, they bunked off because they weren't going, so they didn't necessarily have the skills to be able to get the employment and the jobs that would have given them an opportunity to buy their own homes. Many of them, like myself, would have got expelled from school as we stood up to racism and racist teachers, which again meant that we didn't have that pathway that was then going to enable us to be able to get the kind of education that was going to allow us to escape our communities, or hoods as they're now called. We didn't call them hoods back in those days. So many of my peers started to turn to the local authority to seek housing. And the local authority had never had that kind of relationship with our community. So their way of addressing our needs, and this was proven in the Broadwater Farm public inquiry that I'll talk about later, their way of addressing the young people's needs was to dump them on this estate that they found really hard to let. And not only did they dump them on the estates, they encouraged them to bring their friends because they wanted to populate the estate. And what they said to people was, because there was very few one-bedroom flats, if someone like myself turned up, they'd say, yeah, if you've got a friend, we'll give you a two-bedroom flat. And then someone would go off and they'd look at, in our community we've got this saying, see me and come live with me is two different things, all right? That means I could have a girlfriend and we can get on really fine, we can live together, and everything can just go wrong because we don't happen to be compatible. And that's what was happening. Young people, young boys were leaving their homes, they were looking at their friends and saying, look, we can get a flat on Broadwater Farm, and then they were going to live on this estate. So they, they weren't necessarily living in unified homes. The elderly people, and again, this is a totally different generation, the elderly people always, or in our experiences, the elderly people generally had negative connotations linked to black people. So seeing large numbers of black people on this estate for the elderly white people who was there caused them some concern and fear. And as a result, the police and the Residents Association, happened to be an all-white residents association, they decided, because of the high crime statistics, that they wanted to build a police station on Broadwater Farm. So I should talk to this other photo. So there's the elderly, there's the young playing on the estate, and then there's these are my friends, these are the people I grew up amongst. And again, they're young people, these are the older ones, they're adolescent, they're boisterous, they want to have a social life, they want to come together, they want to be able to socialize together, and more than anything, they want to be able to chill and be able to just forget the stress and the pressure that the system puts on them every single day. But Broadwater Farm really wasn't the place that they're going to be able to do that. So as a result of the backdrop that I've just mentioned, our relationship, and I wasn't on the estate by now, the relationship between people on the Broadwater Farm estate and the police wasn't necessarily the best relationship, because the police started to blame the young black people for the crimes, the high crime rate that existed on the estate. One day we turned on the telly and heard police, Kenneth Newman. And again, at the War in the Babylon exhibition, we actually open up with Kenneth Newman and one of his comments about the Jamaican community and how Jamaicans are predisposed to resisting policing, and as if we were genetically predisposed to do so. And what we explain to people is that Kenneth Newman, he brought from the north of Ireland. He brought with him some policing techniques that had been created, developed on the continents of Africa and Asia, techniques that were there to suppress large groups of people, that were there to oppress large group of people, that were there to criminalize and marginalize and make into others, create as suspect communities. He had developed this strategy and these skills in the north of Ireland and brought it to England. And so one of the things he did was, and it's about how we other certain groups, how we make communities become suspect communities. And one day he announced that Broadwater Farm, among a number of other localities, all of them where the black community resided, that we were symbolic locations for policing. When we heard that, we didn't understand or know what the hell he meant, because this was the beginning of a new process. But we were soon to find out, because when you're a symbolic location for policing, it means these are locations that we're going to pay special attention to. And what it meant was that our communities were, this was the beginning of our communities being really over-policed, whilst at the same time being under-protected. But we had a matriarch on the estate, Dolly Kiffin. She was a mother of 5 who lived on the estate. She did machining to sewing, seamstress, as a way of making her way and making her living. She had 5 children. She was a single parent, and she was a fighter. She'd been involved in the campaign to scrap the SUS laws, so she understood. One of her sons had been arrested for SUS. I think we spoke about the SUS laws previously, but they're really predominant in this time. This is another thing that joins us and binds us all together. You know, sometimes people didn't really understand and get what a community is, but the black community, we're not about, it's not religion that binds us together. It's not necessarily culture, because we come from different islands, or we may come from even different continents ultimately. It was a shared experience that bound us together. And what bound us together as young people was generally a bad experience of the education system and an ongoing shared bad experience of policing. Unfortunately, Dolly, she was aware of this, and some of the other mothers who lived on the estate and who lived around Tottenham. One of them, Martha Osamore, she's now a baroness in the House of Lords. Her daughter, Kate Osamore, is MP for Edmonton. She was also involved in engaging with Dolly and young people on the estate. Dolly called a meeting on the estate when the police not only said it was a symbolic location, but said that they wanted and that they'd agreed with the Residents Association and the local authority to build a mini police station on the Broadwater Farm estate. By now, the demography on the estate is changing significantly, and the numbers of young black, predominantly males, but also single parent families, young black females who are being moved on the estate, is quite significant. The policing and the nature of policing on the estate is pretty oppressive. When the police are making arrests, there's real complaints about them being over-aggressive and battering people. You may have seen during the lockdown the police's use of force in terms of using handcuffs on black kids on a regular basis, or that kind of behaviour, plus the use of truncheons was the norm on Broadwater Farm. So Dolly got together with some young people. They decided that they didn't want a police station. They decided that they wanted to act like empowered youth. In those days, back in the 80s, some of us had the mentality, the belief that as young people born in this country, we had certain rights, and if we demanded those rights and stood for those rights, we would get them. We'd seen what had happened in America. We saw the black civil rights movements, and for us, we wanted to create something of a similar ilk in our communities. So Dolly came together with a bunch of young people, and the Broadwater Farm Youth Association was created. There was a disused chip shop on the estate. People were really angry that the chip shop was gone. It was a really good chip shop. It was one of the few facilities, and when it closed down after representations to the council and such, people just kicked off the door and went inside, took it over, and made it into a youth association. They got in a few pool tables, a few machines to engage young people, and started to sell food. Always a great way of engaging with young people, provide them with food. And on the estate, we didn't believe that the young people were looking after themselves properly or feeding themselves properly, so it was the great place to start. And that enabled us to start engaging with these young people. And we, this is when I started to come onto the estate. I was a qualified youth worker. I came to the estate, and I probably brought a different kind of politics to the estate. Prior to my arriving there, they were inward looking. It was all about what do we do for the youth that live on this estate. But when I went there, what I wanted to bring to them was an opportunity to consider the use off of the estate as well, because all of us needed some kind of space where we could be. And plus there was also many of us outside of the estates who had skills that those on the estates may not have had. So we created this youth association that became much more than a space for Broadwater Farm. So when we talk about what we did on this estate, I don't want anybody to confuse it with what we hear about estates today. This estate represented a front line for the whole of North London. It was going to become the front line for North London in terms of our fight and resistance against racism and oppressive policing. We took over this chip shop, we talked to the young people, we engaged with them, and our message was really simple. We need to clean up this estate. We need to take some responsibility for the place that we live in. We need to understand that we can't allow outsiders to come here and commit crime, because we're going to always be blamed for the crime. And if any of you who are here are committing crime, then you need to understand that what you're doing is anti-community, and ultimately we will have to remove you if that's the way you're going to behave. And whilst doing this, and the young people responded really positively, because now we were helping them to feel that they were part of something that was a bit bigger than them, and was also helping them to understand that the situation that they found themselves in wasn't about them personally. It was about a system that had treated us as suspect people ever since Enoch Powell made that horrendous speech in 1968, probably long before that also. We were so successful that first of all, the politicians came. One day I was in the centre and someone said to me, Staff, go and talk to these people outside. So I said, what people are that? And he said, go and talk. And when I went outside, there was two councillors, right? One black guy and one white guy. The black guy was pretty scruffy. And scruffy looking, I thought, councillor, Uncle Tom kind of guy. And I said, yeah, can I help you? And he said, what's wrong with you youth? And I said, I beg your pardon? He said, what's wrong? I said, who are you? No, actually, I said, hi, can I help you? And they said, this is Bernie, I'm Bernie, and this is Ernie. And I said, you're sure you don't mean Sam and Tom? right? Because he had said, what's wrong with you, Hughes? And then he said again, what's wrong with you, Hughes? So I said, you really want an answer? He said, yeah. I said, I'll tell you what you do, mate. You come back tomorrow and talk to Dolly, because I'm not going to talk to you if that's the way that you're going to approach us about what's wrong with us. And I closed the door. That was Bernie Grant. He came back the next day. Right? We didn't know him, I hadn't heard of him. We had no real links to the council, and I had no reason to know him. But what we did respect is he came back the next day. Normally, we're not always open and receptive to people because we've been ostracized and marginalized and pushed out here. And when people come, they come to tick a box. So we weren't going to help them to tick a box. But if you come back a second time, then we'll sit down and have a cup of tea with you, and we'll tell you what's wrong with us youths. And he came back and we told him. And he said, I think you're exaggerating a bit. It can't be that bad. Crime rate is high over here, and maybe we do need. And we said to him, no. And we explained the facts of life as we saw them. And he went away to talk to some of his colleagues and then created meetings for us to go and talk to some of his colleagues. And one of them that we spoke to, we asked them if we could do meals. Anyone remember Meals on Wheels? Yeah? It was like school dinners, right? That they used to send to old people. The only thing is that school dinners was probably nicer than Meals on Wheels. So we said to them, we said to the council, look, give us a break, give us a contract so we can do the meals for our elderly, because our elderly people, they're not going to want to eat what you provide. We like seasoning in our food. And they said, yeah. And they gave us a contract, and we charged them a premium rate, and it meant that we could offset what we were charging young people, and it meant that we could cater for more young people. So we started to recognize that working with the council could be beneficial to us all. So we started to work with the council, so much so that we said to them, listen, you know what? We can even help you to design out crime. Because some of us had been involved in nefarious activities in our young days. And here we are, we can use those skills to help you to design out crime. And that's what we started to do. We designed out crime. We showed them how to strengthen the doors. We talked to them about the fire escapes. You don't need 2 fire escapes going in one direction. You only need this flat to go in there and that flat to be able to come in there. So we work with them to design out crime, and we work with our young people. And eventually we brought down crime in our borough, in our estate. We brought it down to be the lowest crime rate in the borough. I mean, we were so proud of ourselves, absolutely chopped. We used to have people come from this, I think it was a Quango priority estates program, because there's issues on estates all over the country because they wasn't investing and spending money. And they used to come to us because they felt, and we felt, that we could be a model for community empowerment, for empowerment, youth participation and youth involvement across the country. We really believed that what we were doing was fantastic. So much so that, although I didn't agree with it at the time, and Princess Diana was invited to open our space. And that was controversial within our group, and many of us didn't agree with it. But it says something that she was there, all right? It says that we must have been doing some really good work, because this is when she was still a princess, all right? This is when they still loved her. I don't know if Charles still loved her, but the nation certainly loved her. And it was before she had done that documentary on BBC. She was a real princess. They wouldn't have risked her life or her safety to bring her on our estate if we were the characters that they said we were. And this is in February 1985. And that's her there at the launch of a purpose-built youth centre. And Bernie helped us amongst other people, and we fundraised to build that centre on the estate. We really were the epitome of a youth empowerment movement. We were a movement. There were hundreds of young people who were members of the Youth Association. This is Bernie Grant here at the time, and he got less scruffy as time went on. All right, he smartened up his act. I mean, Bernie, for those who don't know, he was a trade union leader before he became a leader of the council. He's the first black leader of a municipal authority in the history of this country. They called it, he was a left winger. He was different from, don't confuse him with any MP who happens to be black out there today. He was a black MP. He could represent others, but he was a black MP. He was a senator for us. He was our statesman. He was not one of those MPs, if you wrote to him from Birmingham and said you had an issue and it was about race, he wouldn't have sent you that standard response that you would get from the likes of David Lammy and others. That's saying, you know, I'm really sorry, but you're not my constituent. You need to go to your local MP. It was an issue that affected the black community. This man was on it. And part of why he was like that was because of his experiences with us on Broadwater Farm. His politics told him and meant that he wanted everyone to have a centre, and this is him. He made sure that we had a West Indian centre in Haringey. He made sure we had youth centres. He made sure there was leisure centres, because we needed these spaces and places where we could come out and be together and be a community. This man here, wow. We're going to tell you the story of what one man and what one politician can do. So, as the leader of the council, we found him amazingly supportive. Between the opening of the centre and the death of Cynthia Jarrett, I mean, this young man here, we put him here because he was our local artist. If anybody's ever been on Broadwater Farm, if you ever see anything on Broadwater Farm, you're always going to see some of the murals, and Steely was the artist that painted most of those murals. Everything he did was about peace. Even though he did brother Bob Marley, and Bob could talk about war and resistance, it was still about a struggle for peace. In some of the murals that he did on Broadwater Farm, he painted Gandhi, he painted Lenin, and he painted waterfalls. His whole thing was about creating spaces where we could have serenity and calmness. And that was the focus of us in the Youth Association. We wanted to create an opportunity for people to chill. In those days, even today, a lot of people don't understand the pressures of racism, the pressures of discrimination, that daily impact. But we did back then. The daily impact of being discriminated against leaves this mark, not just emotionally and mentally, but physically. And we wanted spaces and places where we could come together and not have to worry or consider racism. And in these days, racism was much more in your face than it is today. And by that I mean we had the groups like the National Front. Many police officers were members of the National Front. In Tottenham, we were reputed to have the largest National Front membership. Well, in the days when Tottenham was outside of London, in Middlesex, it was supposed to be the largest National Front membership outside of London. And then when we got into London, Tottenham, North London, Enfield and Edmonton and Wood Green, they were known as areas, it was known as redneck country. Areas where you didn't want to be caught after dark and after night. So racism was much more overt and much more in your face in these days. And we wanted a space and place where that wasn't going to be accepted or acceptable. And what that meant was we came into conflict with the police on a regular basis, because the police were racist then as they are racist today. And we're not just talking about institutionally racist. I mean, we had police officers who regularly wore the National Front badge proudly. You ever get nicked and put in a van and they turned and they showed you that badge, you just curled up into a ball because you knew what was coming next. And this isn't one or two, this isn't the bad apple stuff, it's the kind of stuff you're hearing today about racist and misogynistic policing. We were living the brunt of it in these days, and there were no bodies to hold them to account. You heard the professor in the opening talk about the weakness of the IPCC, the Independent Police Complaints Commission, and the IOPC, the Independent Office for Police Complaints. None of them are independent, none of them are robust, and none of them are doing much of a job to hold the police properly to account. But in these days, we had the Police Complaints Authority, and that was literally the police investigating themselves. So they were free to do whatever they wanted to do, and inevitably they did. And that's why we see this painting here that depicts the police murder of Cynthia Jarrett in her home on October the 5th, 1985. But 1 week before this, and again at the ICA we had paintings by Kimanthi Donkori depicting not just the killing of Cynthia Jarrett, but what happened exactly 1 week before, the police shooting and ultimately killing of Cherry Gross in Brixton. 1 week before this, a black mother in her home went to answer the door when the police were outside, armed police officers. She opened the door, she saw they was armed, she saw the guns, she turned around to run, and one of these brave British officers shot her in her back. Now, wow, I can't tell you the shockwaves that sent through our community. Brixton is known, it was our, for the black community of Britain, that was our moral capital. It's a place that had kicked off before because of problems with policing, and it kicked off that week. That was 28th of September, 1985. Exactly a week later, the police come to Tottenham. The police come to Tottenham, and their actions lead to the death of Cynthia Jarrett. They actually stopped her son Floyd, someone I went to school with. He was in a battered BMW, but in those days we were supposed to only drive Ford Cortinas, so they took umbrage that he was in this BMW. They stopped him. They said that he had an out-of-date tax disc. They said that he that the vehicle VIN, the vehicle identification number, didn't match the tax disc. Now, normally you're supposed to be given a producer and you go and you produce your documents, but they decided they were going to arrest him. They claimed he tried to assault them and run away. They arrested him, took him to a station, and in that station, an off-duty officer, an officer who was about to go home, saw him, DC Randall, saw Floyd, and because he knew he was one of the members of the Broadwater Farm Youth Association, he said, look, I want to go and turn over this guy's house. They left the police station, 4 officers, they went to his house, they'd taken his keys from his property, they did not have a search warrant, they opened the door with his keys and went into his mother's house. And his mum was in her house. She was shocked to have her door suddenly opened and be confronted by 4 white men in her home. Shocked. And Randall pushed her over. He pushed her down. She suffered a heart attack, unable to get up. He stepped over her and he carried on with the search of the property. When he left the home, he radioed Tottenham Station. She's still on the floor, actually literally dying. He radioed Tottenham Police Station and said everything had gone fine. The police officers then went back to Tottenham Police Station and carried on interviewing Floyd. They didn't tell him that anything had happened to his mum. They didn't tell him his mother had died. Fortunately, her daughter was there with her. Ambulance was called and unfortunately she died. I can't describe the pain and the agony. I knew her personally growing up. We called her auntie. That's what we called mature women, mothers of our friends. She wasn't my blood relative, but we were community, and they just lived around the corner. My mum, my dad knew her. I can't tell you the pain and the agony, the shock and the shock that we felt of hearing of her death. 1 week after they'd shot a black woman in Brixton. People weren't having it. We went to the police station to demonstrate. And the way that the police behaved at the police station, I was there, and as one of the senior leaders of the youth association, I told people that we should leave the police station, leave the vicinity, go back to the youth association, because I could see the police, they were mounting in numbers. Their behaviour was likely to cause a breach of the peace because they showed no empathy and they were winding up the people that turned up there. So we went back to the estate to have a meeting to discuss what we were going to do. And the meeting decided eventually, these are two of Cynthia's children, Michael and sister Patricia Jarrett. At the meeting we decided that there was no point us being on the estate, we might as well go back to the police station and demand the suspension of this police officer, because he was well known to us. He was a racist officer who behaved as if he was a one-man Sweeney. And we wanted to demand that he was suspended, and we wanted to have a full and thorough investigation into his involvement in the death of Cynthia. Unfortunately, the police had a different idea. The police had had a really rough time in Brixton the week before. Simply put, they had a bloody good hiding in Brixton the week before. They were run up and down Relton Road, Cold Harbour Lane, Brixton High Road. The battle was all over the town, and they couldn't contain or restrain. They never can, because when people have a real and valid anger, it always outweighs the bully tactics that these police have employ when they have the upper hand. So Brixton burnt. So when this happened in Tottenham, these police officers were clearly of a mindset and of an opinion that what happened in Brixton the week before was not going to happen in Tottenham, which is fine. What happened in Brixton the week before shouldn't have happened in Tottenham. You shouldn't have attacked a black mother. Shouldn't attack no black person, but you shouldn't have attacked and killed a black mother. So there's no point them now saying that what they were going to do, and this is what they did, is they tried to do the first ever kettle. You know that police tactic that they use nowadays pretty successfully on people who are demonstrating. They tried the first ever kettle that we've ever seen on the black community. We were leaving the estate to go to the station to protest peacefully. And these police came in vast numbers. They came in their riot vans. We saw some police vans, we'd never even seen those kind of vans on the streets before. And they came and they blocked us off from leaving the estate. There was about 100 of us, maybe 150, men and women, boys and girls. And we were literally leaving to go and demand the officer's suspension, but all of a sudden we were surrounded by these baying officers. They came in their hundreds, blocked us off from the exit that we were about to take, and then they started to come. I told you about those underground, the underground car parks. All of a sudden, hundreds of officers coming through these car parks, already dressed in military gear, banging on their shields. They actually started to get quite a tune going up. They kept on shouting out to us, "You lot stay back in there. Get back into your holes, you dirty." Get back in there, you black bastards. You ain't going nowhere. You're not going nowhere till we let you out. And then they decide to bang the shield because they're trying and put fear into you. And then they got this little ditty going, this ain't Brixton, this ain't Brixton, this ain't Brixton. So it's really clear that Brixton was playing heavily on their mind. And for once, they were right. This wasn't Brixton. This was Broadwater Farm. And we knew this space and this place in a way that they didn't. And when people decided that if you weren't going to allow us to come out and peacefully demonstrate, then we're going to take you on right here on this estate right now. You know, I almost meant to start off by saying that someone said to me when I was looking for feedback about the session I did before, someone said to me, you know what, Stafford, it was really good, because that's the first time I've ever been at a presentation where someone spoke about the use of violence and spoke about it in the way you do, in a way that you're proud and it was a positive. And I said, was you in the right session? Because I'm a pacifist. I don't believe in the use of violence to get people to do what you want them to do, because we as a community have had that done to us for centuries. So that's not something I believe in. What I do believe in, though, is the right to defend myself and the right for our community to defend itself when it comes under attack. And that's what we did. Under attack, we fight back. That was a chant. Under attack, we fight back. And that's what happened on Broadwater Farm on October the 6th, 1985. Under attack, we fought back. And it didn't last very long. It's, the uprisings, we call it, they call it the riots, they call it the worst riots ever seen on mainland Britain. The uprisings, we call it, were literally over in about 4.5 hours. It started about 7, it was finished about 11 o'clock. You know, the police, we outmaneuvered them, we outfought them, and we gave them a bloody good hiding. It was a well-deserved hiding. We never apologized for it. Hundreds of police officers got injured that night. There was no looting. We'd learned from other riots and uprisings when sometimes young people, in all riots really, you'll have people who are going to try to make something out of it to improve the position, because that's the whole idea in many ways, but none of that on Broadwater Farm focused on the police, because there was such a rage and an anger that they could do this to a mother within our community. So in a very short space of time, 243 officers were injured, some of them seriously. One of them unfortunately died. I do say, unfortunately, no one goes to work expecting to die, and no one should go to their job and die. But then no one should be in their front room and die, and no one should be opening a door and shot and killed by police officers either. So it really was, it was a war, and the war was over in a short amount of time. They'd totally underestimated the anger and the determination of the young people. And the day after it happened, Bernie Grant contacted us at the Youth Association. There wasn't mobile phones and such. He phoned the office. He said, look, what can I do to stop there being a second night of violence? Because in Brixton, there was 2 nights. When it happened in Manchester, there was 2 nights. Liverpool, there was 2 nights. And nobody wanted 2 nights on Broadwater Farm, least of all the police and the council. No one else wanted anyone else to lose their life. Nobody wanted that. So we said, the youth came together, we spoke, and we said to Bernie, this is what we need you to do. We want you to tell the world that the police came here to do us harm. And we defended ourselves, and we gave them a bloody good hiding, and we shouldn't be punished because we defended ourselves well. We were dumb enough to believe that that was a reasonable position to adopt, and that it was a reasonable demand to make of the state. And Bernie, unlike any other political representative, he went and he said exactly what we said. Normally they would bring out a political representative, and normally they would say, you know, I understand that these young people have issues and we see that there are problems, but this isn't the way to deal with it. Or you get someone like Lammy in 2011 who's going to say, you know, it was some youth from somewhere else who came here and did this. It wasn't our young people. And also, you know, black kids are rioting because their parents are not allowed to beat them. Which is ironic, because I just told you what led up to this was our parents was actually beating us way too much. So anyway, Bernie, he was a real representative, and he told them what we said, that the police had come to do us harm, we defended ourselves, and the police got a bloody good hiding. And wow, after that, but Bernie got a bloody good torturing from the media and the powers that be. In him saying it, it seemed to ratchet everything up. The media focused on Bernie, they were focusing on the messenger as opposed to hearing the message. And they went mad at him. They called him Barmy, Bernie. They told all these lies about what he did in the council. They called him monkey. They called him gorilla. These are in mainstream newspapers in the 1980s. Everybody went for Bernie, but he didn't care. He was trying to make sure that we didn't have another uprising. And as a result of what he did and what he said, he sent in all the cleaners onto the estate. And the cleaners came on the estate and they cleaned up the estate. They cleaned everything. He told them clean everything that could be used as a weapon the next that night. So they did. And the police, because they'd taken such a hammering the day before, the police actually moved out of their way as they cleaned up things. And sometimes said, here, you've forgotten this, take this. Anything that they felt could be turned against them the next night. Now that goes down in the annals of the Scotland Yard, in the history of Scotland Yard, as the biggest fuck up in the history of policing. And it really was. It's because what they had allowed the cleaners to do was to come and clean, forensically clean a crime scene. To take away all the possible forensic, every single shred of forensic evidence that could have been possible. And this, right, this is why Tottenham police, I mean, they was the scourge of Scotland Yard. When the heavy boys came from Scotland Yard and they found out what Tottenham police had allowed to happen, they ran Tottenham police off the estate. Get back to the station. You're not having nothing to do with this investigation whatsoever. You have let us down. And Tottenham was embarrassed, shamed. And it's one of the reasons that we don't have a good relationship with the police in Tottenham, because ever since then they've been trying to get back their reputation with their significant others at Scotland Yard, and it hasn't always worked. But the fact that these police officers came and had pushed the Tottenham police out, it meant that we were now going to be policed by officers who didn't know anything about us. So what they decided to do was come with the most oppressive policing regime possible. They brought in, they say that PACE was brought in, the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, that it was brought in January 1986, but it was brought in on October the 6th, 1985, and it was used against us. We didn't know what our rights were at all. We were being taken off of the streets. We were being denied access to solicitors. People were being beaten, brutalized, racially abused. People were being taken to police stations all over everywhere but Tottenham. So nobody could find them. There was a policy to deny access to solicitors. And and this is for children as well, they actually started out the investigation, I should have said this. Because they had no links and they'd put Tottenham aside, they started their investigation in the Moselle School, which was literally next door to Broadwater Farm. And in that school, this was a school for educationally subnormal children. And they went into this school and they took children at the age of 13, 14 and 15. They arrested them and took them to police stations, denied them their rights, and then fed them the names of the older youth that they wanted to target for the murder of PC Blakelock. They arrested hundreds of us. I got arrested. I've been arrested before. I've been to prison before as a young person. I've been arrested for sus, went off of the rails. I've been to prison. I was a tough kid. But being arrested for this murder, this police officer, that really turned me inside out. I wasn't a tough kid. What they did to us and what they did to me in that station, not really worth repeating, but they brutalized us. If we had cause to rise up before, we had so much more cause to rise up as a result of this police investigation. Hundreds were arrested, and eventually they charged 6 people with the murder of Blakelock. Tottenham was put under siege. Sir Kenneth Newman, as he became, the tactics that he had brought when he came from the north of Ireland was really similar. It was about how you swamped communities. We were totally locked off on Broadwater Farm estate. Oh gosh. Nobody was allowed on the estate. The postman wasn't allowed, or postwomen, postmen, as it mainly was in those days, weren't allowed on the estate to deliver mail. The milk people weren't allowed on the estate to deliver milk. We are the first place, and this is a fact, the first place on mainland Britain where they delivered milk in plastic bottles. We had to negotiate that we got those milks in plastic bottles because they kept on saying if we had milk in real bottles, we were going to make petrol bombs. You know, they made so many stories up about us. They told these stories. We'd gone on an exchange trip to Jamaica where we as youths had raised the funds to go to this Caribbean island for the first time in our lives. We took about 30 of us. We were so proud. And they made up stories that whilst we was in Jamaica, we nipped over to Cuba to learn from Castro about how to fight guerrilla war. I kid you not, these stories were in the paper. They said we had links to Gaddafi. They said that one day they said that we had napalm. I'm not kidding, all of these stories were in the paper. These were all the things they used to justify this oppressive policing. They came on our estate on October the 7th, and they stayed on, that's 1985, and they were there till January 1987 in their hundreds. They used every kind of policing technique that was possible to them at the time. When we got to the murder trials at the Old Bailey, they told us how they could turn our telephones into live receivers. So we all had telephones in our homes. They could turn that, not just listen to it when you was on it, they could turn it into a live receiver and listen to everything that was being said in your home. They used to drive up with vans that had these radars like TV detector vans, and they told us that they could pick out any room in this massive concrete jungle. They could pick out any room and listen to our conversations. They put us under rigorous and oppressive policing regime. We could get nothing on the estate, but the one thing we did have was Bernie Grant. So he supported us. He has made the council give us the funds. If we couldn't have shops on our estates because the shopkeepers were scared to open the shops, he gave us the shops. We ended up, the Broadwater Farm Youth Association, we had a nursery so that single parent families could leave their kids and go and get training. We had a black woman's centre. We had a hairdressers, a dry cleaners, a minicab station. We had greengrocers. All of these things were being run by young black people on Broadwater Farm estate. And then we forced them to give us the contracts to build back the estate when we needed to do the regeneration. There's some films out there, you can see some of our youth, women in hard hats, driving past on tractors, working on building the gardens. We built remembrance gardens, memorial gardens, all-nation gardens where we put the flags that represented everybody that lived on our estate. We turned that estate into a place where people were begging to come and live. Mainly black people, grant you, but we turned it into a place where we could be. And the system and the police just couldn't take it and tolerate it. But we did it because of the support of Bernie Grant. Rest in peace. But they turned our estate into an army of occupation before we got to those stages. This is them, this is our block, and they're there every single day. They were raiding people's homes at gunpoint. When people would say, look, we'll give you the keys, they were still knocking off the doors. They did everything to try to terrify and scare us, to punish us for having the temerity of having stood up to them. They arrested 357 people were arrested in their investigation. About 170 of us were arrested on warrants for murder. Yet the police themselves said the most people who were there at the scene when Blakelock was killed was 20 to 30. So the magistrates, the judiciary, are still kind of working with the police, giving them these amounts of warrants that the actual evidence didn't warrant them doing. They ended up charging 6 people. 2 of them came from the school for educationally subnormal, and they're the ones who named these people. Winston Silcott was made out to be the ringleader of it all. Engin Ragib, who we didn't even know, and Mark Braithwaite. And again, if you came to the exhibition at the ICA, you'd have seen Winston. We had them there as DJs playing music. They're obviously free. That's part of our story. They were there and they were with us, and they're still with us in our community today. But they were arrested and scapegoated as being the ones who were responsible for the murder of the police officer. They went to the Old Bailey in March 1987, 6 of them. And the judge, he protected the juveniles because he could see. These were kids, they were by now 15 and 16 years old, but they had the emotional and intellectual intelligence of 6 and 7-year-olds. Engin Ragib is a pill. When we had him do the psychological testing, they said he was part of the lowest 5th in terms of understanding and intelligence and intellect in this country, that he was easily led. Winston Silcott, he was vulnerable because he was on bail for being involved in another violence offence where somebody died. And Mark Braithwaite, he was someone who suffered from claustrophobia. So when they put him in a police cell, he was begging them to get out after a couple of days and was willing to almost say anything. But none of them confessed to the killing of Blakelock. There was never any forensic evidence against them. All it was the say-so of the officers and some of the witnesses. But when we got to court and tested the quality of the witnesses, it really was, it was one, it's a case that really is a blot on British justice. But the thing is that when the judicial wheels roll, it don't matter how strong, militant you are, those wheels roll. This is Winston Silcott. Me and Winston grew up together. We were really good buddies. That's his dad. His dad's Bill Silcott. And in our community, that man was a legend. He was a legend because he did things before we were even born that people were still talking about today. He was one of those black people who got involved in the Notting Hill riots. They said when this man, Bill Silcott, when he walked into Notting Hill, Teddy boys run, and if they didn't run, they got their legs broken. Right? He was known as a tough man. Don't mess with his. He was a giant of a man. The police battered him once and put him in hospital. Battered him. But he recovered and he was resilient. Those tears are not from being beaten from the police. Those tears are when his son, his firstborn, Winston, is sent to prison for life for a murder that we all knew he didn't do. So we started to campaign. We set up the Broadwater Farm Defence Campaign. And this is where, as you can see, I can talk, right? And the day after the uprisings, we had a meeting in Tottenham Town Hall, and even on the way to the meeting, my friends were saying, Staff, don't talk, right? And I said, I'm not going to talk. And they're saying, Staff, don't talk. And I said, I won't talk. And we got to the meeting, and I sat down there, and I heard people try to explain why it was the whole thing kicked off, and what they was talking was crap. So I heard myself get up, and I started to talk. And by the end of the talk, they said, you know what, Staff, we're voting you for spokesman for the youth. All right? Because everybody knew spokesperson for the youth would have to talk to the media and was going to get arrested. And I took the position because who knows better must do better, and we needed to represent, and we needed to have our voices heard, and we needed to defend those whose rights they were abusing. So that's me in, God, 1986 or something, probably about 26-year-old, standing outside Highbury Magistrates Court when they're doing the committal hearings for the Tottenham Six. Yeah. We also put on a range of events. Our defence campaign was like no other, as you can imagine. We did things like camp outside Downing Street. We went on midnight pickets outside Wormwood Scrubs. We went mad in several courts and such. It was a pretty lively defence campaign, a very in-your-face kind of campaign. But we also put on events, and this one here, Culture for Freedom. If you look at some of these names, we had footballers here, footballers who played in the first division, like Paul Ince, oh gosh, I can't even remember them all nowadays, it was so long ago. Justin Fashanu, we had boxers there, black boxers turning up because what they'd seen was so outrageous. I don't know if we could get our black celebrities to participate and support today, but back then they were absolutely willing to do so because there was a real recognition that as a community we needed to stand together or we were going to fall. We campaigned hard and long for the release of the Tottenham Free. And we were fortunate in some sense because this was the time when the British judicial system was really under the microscope. It was with the time when the cases of the Birmingham Six and the Guildford Four was coming to the Court of Appeal and they were being released because of corrupt police practices. So it was a time when people could actually believe that the police were corrupt and doing wrong. I mean, who could really believe that today, eh? Went to the Royal Court of Justice in 1991. And Winston's lawyers, they carried out what was called an ESDA test, electronic static test. White man's magic, we called it, right? It helped to prove that the confession that they said Winston made, and this was the confession, right? This is what they said he said. They said, we showed him the evidence, and the evidence was a photograph of someone he knew wasn't him. And they said he cracked, and when he cracked, he turned and he went to the windows and he said these words: "You CUNTs, no one's going to believe you. You've made a terrible mistake. You're going to lose your job." And they say, we say to him, "You need to tell us where the weapons are so that we can save further life and ensure no harm comes." And he says, "You're too late, man. You're too late." And that's the confession. They didn't do the, okay, Gov, it's a fear cop. They're very smooth, very sophisticated. They've been doing this for generations. The copper who did it was the highest ranking investigative officer in the Metropolitan Police Service. He stitched him up and they came to court and they said that he had adopted a pose of guilty. And on that, they found him guilty. But 6 years later, we got the lawyers, got the scientists to do an ESDA test, and it proved that those words were never spoken. It proved that the two officers that was in the cell with Winston Silcott lied, and that they supplanted those words over the words that he said. And on that basis, Winston was freed, and the Tottenham Free was freed. When Winston was freed, the highest judges in the land, as a matter of fact, the prosecutor who had prosecuted the Tottenham Free and who had prosecuted lots of the Broadwater Farm cases, his name was Roy Amlott. This guy was a rising star in the Department for Public Prosecutions. He was their top man. And they said to him, when we proved at the ESDA test, they said to him in the court, "What do you say, Amlett?" And he said, "My lords, had I known what they did to Silcott, I wouldn't have gone against any of the Broadwater Farm defendants." That means he was totally embarrassed and ashamed to be tarred with the behaviours and the actions of these police officers. And he wasn't just saying it. That man never prosecuted another case in this country after that. He became a human rights lawyer defending people's rights. He said that, and the judges in the court, there was the 3 highest judges in the land, they looked at Winston Silcott and they too apologised for the judiciary's role in allowing these men to be sent to prison. But the police never apologised. The police were forced to charge the 2 officers that took Winston Silcott's statement. This is the biggest embarrassment now in the history of policing. I told you what they said about Tottenham police being the biggest F-up, but this is the biggest embarrassment because you guys have spent, this was the most intensive and expensive investigation in the history of British policing. It still is even today, even after all of these events that we've seen recently, because we've had several investigations. So these guys now, they're the scourge of Scotland Yard, or they should be, because they've now let down all of their colleagues when they had all this opportunity to try and find someone who had murdered one of their colleagues. So they too were arrested and charged with a conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. And this is the kind of history that they don't tell you about the media, right? They were arrested and they ended up going to the Old Bailey, the same court that sentenced the Tottenham 3 to life in prison. And they went into court. They had to retire from being police officers, so at least we got their jobs. And they went into court and they walked out 3 men. How is it possible that in the biggest case in the land, 3 people are sent to prison, the highest judges in the land release those 3 people, apologise specifically, and judges generally don't apologise. They didn't apologise to the Birmingham 6, and they didn't apologise to the Guildford 4, but they apologised to Winston. How is it that these 2 senior officers, Detective Chief Superintendent Melvin and his sidekick, whose name escapes me, how is it that they go to court and not get found guilty? It's because a conspiracy takes place between the police, the judiciary, and the CPS. And that conspiracy is, we're not going to call the victim. We're going to have a case where we won't call Winston Silcott. Now, can you imagine that? They don't call the victim. He's alive. I mean, it's in the Old Bailey. We know that they do lots of murder cases in the Old Bailey, so you'd expect an experienced judge to say, okay, if it's a murder case, I don't expect to see the body. But if it's a case where we've allowed someone out of prison, that person has to come to court to tell us what happened. And somehow the prosecution, in full glare of the British media, does not call Winston Silcott the victim. And these corrupt bastards, and you hear these police today, oh, you know, we've got some corrupt officers in there and we don't understand how they're in here. Right? Or we have these corrupt officers and we don't know how to get rid of them. What they don't tell you is the reason they can't get rid of them is the police federation, the police union, and all of the deals that they've done with the police federation to protect each other. So these 2 corrupt bastards, and excuse my language, but I can think of no other words to describe them, they're allowed out. And what they did in the trial was, rather than prosecute them, they retried Winston Silcott. They brought in some fictitious statements. They never necessarily had to bring in the witnesses. They used these statements and they said, look, this is what people told us about Winston. This is what they said. It's really Winston is really the murderer. And somehow that was enough for them not to be held to account for their actions. And this is why, in places like Tottenham, we don't play with police and the judicial system, because we have seen how easy it is for them to kill and get away with it, to take people and to prosecute them falsely, to conspire against them, and we see how difficult it is to be able to hold them truly, meaningfully, be able to hold them to account. And it didn't end there. We got the Tottenham 3 out in 1991. We had re-investigations open in, the minute the Tottenham 3 were released, they reopened the investigation. Where I had been arrested for murder twice and I decided to sue them and they had to pay me in an out-of-court settlement, I was then told, all right, staff, we're no longer investigating you for murder, we're investigating you as the ringleader for the riots. So they never stopped. They kept on coming. And eventually, after 3 new investigations in 2012, after they killed Mark Duggan, and because we had the temerity to rise up again, they came and they arrested Nicky Jacobs in the never-ending struggle. Nicky Jacobs had already been arrested in the original investigation and had gone to prison for affray. He had served 5 years, and at no time had they suggested that he was the murderer. And in Nicky's case, they brought 3 witnesses, and 2 of them were original witnesses from Winston Silcott's case. And this is what they said. They were all drug addicts and alcoholics. And this is what they said. Yeah, we didn't tell the truth in the first case. We said what we thought the police wanted us to say, but now we're telling the truth. You've got to believe us. But the jury didn't believe them because the stories that they told were just totally crazy. Didn't even, they put the murder in the wrong scene and everything. But the never-ending struggle, the state that is able to use all of its resources to focus and target on specific communities, minority communities, communities that are different. The state that will do everything to ensure that we can't hold it to account. And it's not just about institutional racism in terms of the police, it's about structural racism, where each body is protecting each body and nobody holds anybody to account. This is the world that we live in. This is the world that we grew up in. This is where I cut my teeth as an activist and what has forced me to become an activist. And it's because of the strength that we showed in these struggles why the police and the system have created, and I guess this is going to go into the next lecture when we meet, why they created processes and means and ways to breaking down our community. Because when we did come together, when we did stand together, we were really strong. And they've broken us down and turned us from this community that supported each other, especially against racist attack and police attacks, and turned us into a community that now attacks each other and means that the police don't have to do it so much. All right, I think I'm nearing the end of my time, so I'm going to open up and let people ask questions. Yeah? Thank you.
I have lots of questions. I was fortunate enough to see you on the last day of the RCA, and I think seeing the exhibition with your narration was just so exceptionally powerful, so thank you.
Thank you.
I have lots of curiosities about what you've shared. At the opening of the lecture, you explored a little bit about how kind of being second generation in the Windrush, from the Windrush, formed some of the catalyst in kind of creating the kind of ecosystem that enabled the community to...
Oh, sorry, can everybody hear me? Sorry. You know, you talked a little bit about how second generation young people during the Windrush era, there was a whole complex ecosystem around how they ended up kind of in the like how were the circumstances made. What I'm curious about is what's your perspective of where we are now, and what do you see, what do you see in our current ecosystem when we're looking at racialized policing, violent policing, hyper scrutiny of black communities today?
I mean, I think where we are is a direct result of the struggles that we, and the way that we struggled in the 80s. Have you heard of Oliver Letwin? Yeah. Right? Yeah. The Letwin letters, the Letwin papers. as a result of our rising up in the 80s, there came a pivotal point where the Tory government themselves, some of the doyens, some of those ministers in that government started to say to Thatcher, you know what, these kids, they can't just be doing this because they're feral. They can't just be doing this because they're anti-police. There must be some real reason in it. There must be some social, economic drivers to their behaviors. Maybe we should begin investing in these communities. Because the story about this is, if you go and you look, there's a thing called the Urban Fund or the Urban Programme, where massive money is coming into urban areas, but not the areas where the black communities reside. So what they were suggesting is now that they should need to start investing in our communities. And we're led to believe that it almost happened, and that Thatcher turned to her think tank, and Oliver Letwin, who goes on to become a Tory doyen. He only just got kicked out of the Tory government because he was against Brexit. He's a doyen in their government. He wrote a letter, and they released it not too long ago, where he said, don't invest in the black community. If you do so, then the black voluntary sector, if you do so, they're just going to have more Rasta arts and crafts and festivals and sell marijuana. Yeah, but, and they, no, seriously, that's what the letter says. Right? And as a result, serious decisions were taken on that basis. It would appear to us that even Labour took those decisions, because what we then saw was the withdrawal of all funding to the black voluntary sector. Organisations like ourselves that was doing such good work with these young people, all of that funding dried up. That's no different to that American programme of COINTEL, where the CIA, the FBI and the police all get on to the Black Panthers and they take them out. That's what they did to us. They took out the black voluntary sector, and we were the sector that provided a safety net for our youths. The youths we worked with on Broadwater Farm are no different from the Mandem, apart from they understood they was youths, right? They were no different from the Mandem. They were exactly the same kind of young people, yet we were able to work with them in a really positive and constructive way. All those shops that I told you we had on Broadwater Farm, they were running them. They were the builders, the decorators. We did the painting on the estates. We did the gardening. We put money in young people's pockets so that they felt that they were somebody and they felt that they were contributing. We made them feel valued. And today it's the total opposite. And this is, it's not by chance. So Broadwater Farm, I told you, it was a focal point for Edmonton, Wood Green, Stoughton, parts of Stoke Newington, Hornsey, for all of North London. But when the police became that, when I showed you them camping out on the estate, it meant that people weren't going to come there no more. And that was part of them being there, their reason d'etre for being there and hanging out there for 18 months, to stop people from coming there and to break the heart of the community, and then make young people who followed, who didn't understand that we were community, they see this other C word, they see competition, and then they behave like that because we are not there to mentor them, show them, guide them to do something better. I hope that answered your question. Right. Sarah.
Thanks, Stafford. I have a question. You talk a lot about this. Oh, sorry.
You talk quite a lot about actual places, physical places, spaces where, you know, the chip shop and the kind of the terrain of the estate. And I wonder what you think about how young people that you say are kind of similar to how young people were then, and the fact that they're connecting or not connecting almost always through their phones and don't necessarily have physical spaces where you can have actual people and do actual things with your time in the same way. And what does that do to resistance when you don't have a place where you can congregate?
When you don't have a community, right? It does so much to resistance because you think it's about yourself. When you're just on your phone and on social media, you may have friends in your circle, and then you may have these other people that are not friends in your circle, and you're all engaging on this phone. It's ultimately what creates a lot of the violence that we see. It's clear, and I did say that Bernie made sure that there was an Irish centre for the Irish community, that there was youth centres for young people, and there was a West Indian centre for the older African Caribbean community. Everybody needs space to come together, to share. We need space. We lost all of these centres and things, all the things that Bernie bequeathed us, the system took back. And we needed those spaces to be able to come together, bring our young people, show our young people how we were all interconnected, show our young people that when they see our face, it's not competition, we're community. So it's critical. Can't tell you how important it is that we have those spaces, and right across London. Communities, particularly the black communities, we've lost all the spaces that may have been given to us or leased to us or loaned to us during the 70s and 80s. And the original lecture that I did showed why, as a community that came here as economic migrants and having to pay a colour bar tax, how that meant we've never been able to capture and build the kind of capital that will allow us to build and buy these spaces, and who can buy spaces in London now. So our opportunity of having spaces going forward pretty reduced. And where we do have spaces where young people can come together in places like schools, for example, even in these spaces, we got police and such who are still attacking their liberty and their ability to be free and to engage. So it's critical and crucial that we have those spaces.
One question? Yeah? It's just a short question. Could you talk a bit about the trip to Jamaica in the mid-80s, the exchange trip that you mentioned?
Oh, wow. I mean, we did have a photo, it was on the exhibition. It was the first time, it was really important, it was the first time for many of us, myself included, that we got a passport and left this country. It was the first time for most of us, myself included, that we'd gone to a Caribbean island. Before, as young people growing up, we kind of rejected the Caribbean. Well, I did, because my parents talked about Jamaica. It's like, if Jamaica's so good, why didn't you stay there and have me there? It can't have been that great if you've come to this place and put up with this crap. So please, give us a break about Jamaica. And it was only through starting to hear this reggae music that talked about our experience. But it was a worldwide experience because it was talking about class in Jamaica, but we can convert that in England to be talking about race, that made us start to look at these islands as home, and made us start to not want to accept the term or the name English and end up with this being called African Caribbean and such. So about 40 of us went on the exchange trip. We also convinced the council that they should twin with a town that we were going to in Jamaica. It wasn't that hard, because we said to Bernie, twin with Maypen and you can come on the trip with us and give us some funding. So we were also able to get them to twin, so there was that political linkages between our home here in England and the homes where our hearts was. It was amazing to go there and see the culture. First thing I learned was the Yardies are not as rough and as tough as the ones that came to England. It was amazing to be in this space where when you woke up in the morning, and I don't take this the wrong way, you only saw black faces, right? Because it meant that racism was not going to be an issue with you today. Although it may be indirectly because of poverty and such, You just weren't going to feel it. And it was the first time in my 25 years on the planet that I had a couple of weeks where I just didn't think about race or racism, especially the structural type that is so damaging. Unfortunately, as soon as we got back from the exchange trip, the uprisings happened. So the benefits of it kind of got washed away with time. But we also brought 40 Jamaicans over here on an exchange trip. And some of them are still here, they just didn't bother to go home. Right? But again, we were really proud as young people to being able to have come together and raised the kind of funds that would enable us to do it. Because for those Jamaicans who came here, it was also a life-changing trip. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very inspiring sharing. I'm just curious about how this project at all, or your activism and experience through the other happenings after this event, how we contextualize this event in retrospect. So how, in short, it's like how other events similarly share similar characteristic or emotional provocation, and how contextualize something happened in the past. Does it change, or what? How does it help you to reconstruct the whole thing?
How does it help? I mean, in terms of contextualizing it, what happened to us in 1985 on the Broadwater Farm estate is exactly what happened to us in 2011 when Mark Duggan was killed. Mark Duggan was murdered. That's what the FA model clearly shows. But it's not just the killing, it's not just that one incident, it was the response to our response. It was they're shutting us down when we went to the police station, them denying us a voice. And you know, Martin Luther King says that riots are the voice of the voiceless. So every time that they tried to deny us our opportunity to have our voices heard, it has led to significant public disorder. From that context, it makes activists like me want to reach out and engage with others, get our voices heard, get our stories told, so that there is never a moment when we feel that we're not being heard and our voices are not being heard. So it does help to shape the locality, and it's helped to shape my activism and activists locally in how we try to engage with the system. It tells me that although self-help, which is what we were doing on that estate, although self-help is fundamental and necessary, we can't do it on our own, and we can't do it alone. And as a community, we have to start to engage with allies and groups and people who can help us to become more than we are if left on our own. I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but best I can do for now. Yeah.
I'll just shout, don't worry. I'll make myself heard. Thank you so much. I went along to the ICA exhibition, like I'm sure lots of people, landmark. I've got two questions. It's an important exhibition. Will it be shown again? Not necessarily at the ICA or whatever. It needs to be shown again. I'm just wondering if it will be shown again. And what's Broadwater Farm like now?
Oh, wow. Okay, the exhibition has been, I guess we could say it's been mothballed. We would love to do it again. We're talking to people about the potential for doing it again, and maybe doing it in different regions where we can also tell and build in the stories of those different regions. So hopefully, inshallah, I think it was too significant not to come again. But I've got to say that the arts world have not been all over us to bring it back to them. Even though we showed, right, they broke records and it was good business.
What about maybe teaming up with universities, perhaps? There's a lot to know from, but
That's
to consider.
And sorry, the second part was?
What's
What's Broadwater Farm like? Oh God, it's
that's okay.
come on. They've run it down totally. They wanted to get everybody off. They've had all these, regentrification, and there's this whole notion that if there is a problem, you just move the problem elsewhere. They've tried to do that, but there's been a campaign from the community, so they now say that they're going to regenerate the whole entire estate. We look forward to seeing that. And one of the great things is they've agreed that they're going to keep all the murals that our friend Steely did, because that's part of the estate's history and such. So it's being regenerated, but the community still has a say about their future there.
No cladding.
Thank you.
No cladding, no cladding. And unfortunately, it's also become an ends. An ends. These young people, so it's one of those estates that fights against people who come from an estate down the road. And that's the long-term cost of them undermining the great youth empowerment activities that we used to deliver on that estate. Thank you. Thank you.
First of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your story. It's really amazing to see the parallels in where I come from in the States and the movements I've been involved in and the struggle that you've faced in your life. I'm particularly interested in the long-term impact of the litigation against the community. I saw that destroy many movements in the States, even in the 12 years that I've been an activist. And I'm curious if you have had any conversations within your community about what it means to reconnect or fortify within the face of decades of litigation against it.
Globalization. I mean, our young people, in neighbours like those estates and such, globalization, we're fighting against the opposite. We're fighting against them becoming micro and becoming these gangs, and the world is passing many of our communities by right now at this moment. We're communities that are in crisis. And we understand that crisis has its roots in globalization and regeneration. But in our communities, it's a battle for survival that is taking place. And many of those discussions, unfortunately, are not happening. If they are happening, they may be happening in spaces and places like this, but then it's not being brought back to those communities, for those communities to become educated and understand from whence their real oppressions come. So we're a bit of a way behind some other places in those discussions and debates, unfortunately.
Just like everybody else, really grateful for this time and for your knowledge. You spoke a lot about community and also the kind of what sounds like a network of communities and just kind of moments in time. So you mentioned Birmingham, Liverpool, Manchester. How much kind of interconnection was happening, especially where, you mentioned the sister that was killed in Brixton, and then a week later, how did news travel? How did you guys kind of connect and reach out, which is obviously what you've spoken about just recently about that's what we need to do now.
I mean, we had a level of connectivity that young people today I don't think can understand or appreciate, even though the transport routes might be greater and communication may be more readily available. We were connected through those people who came from the islands, the Windrush generation, those natural connections, and we were connected through sound systems. That was what brought us, built culture. We would leave with sound systems from London and go to Birmingham. We wouldn't have no vibes. There would be a natural connectivity. The music connected us. But most of all, it was our experience. It was that knowledge that we was all having a same shared experience. We hardly even needed to speak about it, especially when we came together. That's what we wanted to do, come together and get away from it. But our connectivity was based on a shared experience. What black people were suffering and enduring in Manchester, black people were suffering and enduring in Tottenham, and were suffering and enduring in New Cross. That's what actually made us a community, communities of shared experience, not just communities, big geographical communities because of the islands we came from. There was a natural connection. You know, I've always said, when I come out my home, if I saw a black face a quarter of a mile down the road, I put my hand up, because I know that when we come together, we're gonna nod, we're gonna greet each other. He or she may tell me, careful when you go down that road, brother. There's some bad men down there, the NF are down there, they're selling their magazines. We know that we need each other for support. We know that we were a true minority, and our connectivity, at the time, it just seemed like absolutely just natural. Just how it was and how it would always be. That it's become what it is today is what's really shocking and surprising and quite unbelievable, that it's become this in such a short space of time. I could leave my house and go anywhere, and people could leave theirs and come into our communities and our neighbourhoods, and we would welcome them. As long as they were going to behave the way we behaved, they were absolutely welcome. And nowadays, that connectivity just isn't there. And that's not by accident. It's by scheming by the system.
I think I want to say, first of all, big up to you. Just jog my memory about sound system culture. I did an event in Brixton last year with Black Dread, and he said that sound system culture connected your generation that way as well. So yeah, that was love. I have two questions. My first question is, I can't seem to find any stories about the police being arrested for the murders of Cherry Gross or Cynthia Jarrett. I want to know if you could shed some light on that. And then my second question is, I've been racking my brain a lot about what type of question I could ask you, because I've been really inspired today, and I really, really appreciate the work you've done. This has been really brilliant. But what happens if allyship doesn't work, or if it runs out? What do we do?
Okay. So first and foremost, a police officer, Detective Chief Inspector Lovelock, got arrested and charged with shooting Cherry Gross. At the time, she was alive, so he wasn't charged with her murder. I can't remember what the charge was, and it's irrelevant because he got off, as they always do. And we felt it was ironic that Lovelock shot Cherry Gross, and the next week Blakelock ended up losing his life on the Broadwater Farm estate. Wow. The second part, sorry?
What happens if allyship doesn't work?
Well, I mean, again, I'm not like the Black Lives Matter movement that thinks that allyship alone is going to change our plight, because it hasn't worked to date, right? And inside of us, we know that we have to take responsibility and we have to take ownership. But when we develop partnerships with people whose integrity and whose intent is right and fit and proper and appropriate, I think that we've got to do that. But somehow, it's got to be in us to be able to come up with the answers, because no one else is going to do that. But I believe in direct action. That means me taking responsibility for being here, for being present, for engaging, taking responsibility for trying to make a difference, taking responsibility for trying to be the change that I want to see. I don't expect anybody else to do it. But allyship can mean that we can get into spaces and places like here today that generally we wouldn't have a chance. So it has a role and a place.
Stafford, I think we need to bring it to an end, and thank you for another magnificent lecture. Thank you very much.